大家好，欢迎来到多维世界。这两天，地缘政治圈发生了一场含糖量为0、火药味爆表的公开对决。澳洲广播公司 Abc 的王牌节目7点30分紧急连线了中国全球化智库的副主任高志凯。这场采访可以说是把大国博弈的底层逻辑，用最直白、最没有外交辞令的方式，直接摊在了阳光底下。事情的起因是中国最近在太平洋搞了一次大动作，从潜艇上试射了一枚洲际弹道导弹。结果呢，就在几个小时前，澳大利亚刚好和太平洋岛国斐济签了一个共同防御协定，明摆着是冲着围堵中国来的。这枚导弹一落地，西方直接破防了。澳洲外长黄英贤立刻跳出来指责，说中国预警时间太短，破坏地区稳定。可黄英贤没想到，高志凯在采访里不仅没有半点退让，反而甩出了一句让全澳媒体集体炸锅的话。他说，澳大利亚应该心存感激，因为中国还给你们提供了提前通知的礼遇。不单如此，面对澳方对中国核武库规模的打探，高志凯更是直接放话，中国到底有多少核弹头？这是当今时代最大的战略模糊。但有一点是确定的，那就是任何敢对中国发动核战争的国家，都将被彻底消灭，化为乌有。什么叫大国自信？这就叫大国自信。你跟我谈实力，我就跟你谈底线；你跟我玩围堵，我就让你看看什么叫真正的战略威慑。那么，这场时长不到10分钟的连线，到底透露了多少细思极恐的信号？中国在这个时间点试射导弹，背后有着怎样的历史和现实考量？下面让我们一起进入正片，看看这场高能的战略摊牌。
On Monday, a Chinese submarine test-fired a ballistic missile in the Pacific, sending a message about the nation's nuclear capabilities, just hours after Australia signed a mutual defence pact with Fiji. Pacific leaders were quick to criticise the move, and the Philippines called it a reckless display of military power. I spoke to Professor Victor Gao, the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation, earlier today from Beijing. Victor Gao, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you very much for having me.
What was the purpose of China firing a nuclear-capable long-range ballistic missile deep into the Pacific Ocean?
Well, China is one of the biggest nuclear powers in the world of today. No one should second guess about China's military capabilities. And for China to launch such a testing fire is very routine and very normal. No country should pretend to be surprised about that.
Well, when you say routine, that's not strictly true, is it? Because the last test was in September 2024, and for this kind of missile prior to that in the 1980s. So that's not routine, is it?
I think it is routine. I think not long ago, China tested a land-based missile, which dropped into the ocean to the east of the French Polynesian. And this time it is more or less in the same line, and it dropped way off the coast from Australia. So I think Australia should have no reason to be surprised about that, and Australia should also not pretend to know about the Chinese military capabilities. In my best judgment, China is completely on the par with the United States in terms of conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. And China and the United States want to maintain peace between these two most consequential countries, and no other country should agitate for war or showdown between themselves and China. We should really promote inevitability of peace in the world of today.
Just to understand what you're saying about China's intentions, we understand China currently has about 600 nuclear warheads. Is it China's intention to build as many nuclear warheads as the United States, to be on par with the United States?
You never know how many nuclear warheads China has, and this is the biggest strategic ambiguity in our times. No one should know about that. Last year, in a very important meeting, I made a point. No country should ever imagine imposing a nuclear war on China, because while China will not tell you how many nuclear warheads China has, China will have enough nuclear warheads to annihilate the country which dares to impose a nuclear war on China. This is the strategic certainty and the assurance in our time. Therefore, get along with China in peace. Don't agitate for war with China, and don't pretend that China is not a mighty military power in the world of today, dedicated for peace, dedicated to defend free trade.
You talked about the fact that Australia shouldn't be surprised by this test, and yet the Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong made it clear that the warning of this test was extremely short, so they were surprised. Do you accept what she says, that a test of this nature with very limited warning is destabilising for the region?
No, not at all. I think China follows international protocol in notifying countries of concern for this testing. And I think Australia should be grateful that China give Australia the courtesy of advance notice about the testing, about the flight details, etc. And I hope China and Australia will really get along with each other, not only as two very large economic trading partners, but also more and more sharing and coordinating on political matters or even geopolitical matters.
Let me ask you about the timing of the test. Australia and Fiji had just signed a new defence alliance, one of a number of treaties signed by Australia designed to push back against China's influence in the Pacific. Was this test timed to coincide with the signing of that agreement?
Personally, absolutely not. The testing, as far as I understand, started on July the 6th, one day before the anniversary of what we call July the 7th incident, marking the Japanese full-scale aggression of China on September the 7th, back in the 1930s. This is the main reason, in my best judgment, of why this testing started on July the 6th, one day before this very important anniversary.
Let me just ask you this, if I may. How much do you think that this test of a nuclear-capable missile landing in the Pacific will set back China's diplomacy in the Pacific?
Absolutely not. I think China and Pacific countries, especially the island countries, get along with each other very well. We respect each other. We deal with each other.
And yet the leaders of the Pacific nations made clear that they objected to China testing a missile of this nature in the Pacific.
Well, in the world of today, in terms of practicality, you may object, but then you need to follow the international rules. The Pacific is not a prohibited region for nuclear testing, and China has absolute legitimacy in doing this kind of testing in the Pacific without violating any international protocol. This is the end of the story, period, and this should not be a hindrance to China-Pacific cooperation. China is a force for international peace. By testing its nuclear capability, China will deter war of all kinds, including nuclear war being imposed on China.
If China was sincere about this being part of China's efforts to bring peace to the world, it would seek to re-engage in international negotiations on nuclear non-proliferation, wouldn't it?
Well, China wants to enter into nuclear renegotiation on the condition that the United States and Russia will agree not to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon countries, against nuclear-free zones, and not being the first country to use nuclear weapons. On that basis, I think China will be perfectly happy to enter into negotiation of any kind with Russia or the United States or both of them, but not on these conditions. China will not enter into negotiations.
Do you expect that we will see further testing of long-range missiles, including airborne long-range missile testing? Is that what we'll see next?
Well, China has already declared to the world its nuclear launch capabilities can touch any corner in any part of the world within 20 minutes or so. So no country should be surprised if China will do such testing in any corner of the world, if China decides to do so. And no country should be an obstacle to China's testing like this. And I hope every country in the world, including Australia, should be very happy to see that China's declared nuclear policy is not to use nuclear weapon against any non-nuclear weapon country, against a nuclear-free zone, and China will never use nuclear weapon the first ahead of any other country against other countries. And China will never allow any nuclear power to impose a nuclear war on China without having that country annihilated by the Chinese nuclear capabilities.
These don't sound like terribly peaceful words, but let me just ask you one question. Does Australia's increasing interoperability, that is working alongside with enabling US forces in Australia, make Australia a target for the Chinese military?
Well, at the time when AUKUS was announced, I said publicly on Australian television that Australia should really treasure the luxury of being a nuclear-free country. So my point is very simple. Treasure the nuclear-free zone, free country status for Australia, and make sure that Australia will not be involved in any nuclear confrontation. And a nuclear-powered submarine will be tantamount to be a nuclear submarine in itself, and is a major step into enriching nuclear uranium, etc., and possessing nuclear technologies to be less and less considered as a nuclear-free country. And I want to urge everyone in Australia to do the right thing. Stay away from being a nuclear power, because you do not know what will be the consequence. Thank you.
Victor Gao, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
好，看完刚才的正片，大家有什么感受？是不是有一种时代真的变了的既视感？在这段3分钟的总结里，我想带大家看清这场交锋背后最核心的3层地缘逻辑。第一，西方的双标神话彻底破灭了。在采访里，主持人一直试图用所谓的太平洋岛国反对来给中国扣帽子，但高志凯一句话就把他顶回去了。太平洋不是哪个国家的后花园，更不是导弹试射的禁区。中国在国际法框架内合法试射，程序正义，实力合规。西方习惯了自己拿着大棒四处挥舞，却容不下中国在自家的公海上练练兵。这种只许州官放火，不许百姓点灯的时代已经一去不复返了。第二是关于时机和底线的精确计算。澳洲媒体拼命想把这次试射和中澳、中斐的外交博弈扯上关系，以此渲染中国威胁论。但高志凯透露了一个非常重要的细节，试射恰逢7.7事变纪念日，这是在告诫某些蠢蠢欲动的外部势力，今天的中国早就不是1937年的中国，我们不惹事，但绝不怕事。中国的核政策很明确，不首先使用，但谁要是敢把核战争强加给中国，对不起，我们拥有将对方彻底抹去的战略反击能力。这不是恐吓，这是大国之间对等威慑的战略确定性。第三，也是高志凯给澳大利亚留下的最后通牒， AUKUS 是一条不归路。澳洲现在放着好好的无核红利不享受，非要绑在美英的战车上，去引进行星级的核动力潜艇和浓缩铀技术，这等同于把自己从安全区主动推向了火线。一旦中美真的发生极端冲突，澳洲的这些军事基地必然会成为第一批被锁定的战略目标。高志凯那句你根本无法预料将会带来怎样的后果，绝不是一句空话。各位朋友，今天这场刀光剑影的采访，其实就是未来几年印太局势的一个缩影。澳大利亚夹在最大的贸易伙伴中国和最大的军事盟友美国之间，到底是在玩火自焚，还是在做最后的垂死挣扎？ 屏幕前生活海外的所有华人同胞们，你们身在不同的地方，对于身边的地缘政治变化一定有更切身的体会。你们觉得澳洲这步棋真的走对了吗？中国这次的硬核表态能不能真正震慑住那些试图在亚太挑起战火的黑手？欢迎在评论区留下你们的真知灼见，我们一起畅所欲言。这里是多维世界，我们下期节目不见不散。